It is the middle of the night on the Sea of Galilee, and the wind is screaming. A sudden, violent squall has dropped down through the surrounding hills, turning the normally calm lake into a deadly, churning washing machine. Inside a wooden fishing boat, a group of grown men are losing their minds. You have to remember, many of these men are professional fishermen. They have spent their entire lives on this water. They know how to ride out a storm. But this one is different. The waves are breaking over the sides. The boat is filling with water, and these hardened, calloused men are utterly convinced that they are going to die. And in the back of the boat, resting his head on a leather sandbag, Jesus of Nazareth is fast asleep. The Gospel of Mark tells us they wake him up, shouting over the roar of the wind, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus opens his eyes. He stands up in the violently pitching boat, but he does not grab a bucket to help them bail water. He does not offer them a word of encouragement to row harder. Instead, he looks out at the raging wind and the chaotic waves, and he speaks to them. "Peace, be still." And instantly, and the wind ceases. The water becomes like glass. A dead, calm falls over the lake. What happens next is incredibly revealing. You would think the disciples would be breathing a sigh of relief, thanking him, perhaps laughing in the sudden quiet. But the text explicitly says they were filled with great fear. In fact, the original Greek implies they were more terrified of the silence than they were of the storm. They look at each other and ask a question that changes the course of human history. Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? To a modern reader, Jesus calming a storm or feeding a crowd looks like a supernatural display of power, a miracle to prove he was sent by God. But to a first-century Jewish mind steeped in the Hebrew scriptures, these events were not just magic tricks. They were terrifying, earth-shattering claims of identity. There is a pattern hidden beneath the nature miracles of Jesus. A blueprint laid down thousands of years earlier in the Old Testament. And later on, when Jesus walks out onto the water in the middle of another storm, the Gospel writers include a very strange detail. They note that as he was walking on the waves, he intended to pass them by. Why would Jesus walk out onto a raging sea, only to walk past his terrified friends? The answer to that question unlocks the entire mystery of who Jesus claimed to be. To understand why the disciples were so terrified when the wind stopped, you have to understand how the ancient world viewed the sea. In the ancient Near East, the ocean was not a place where you went for a relaxing vacation. It was the abyss. It was the realm of the dead, a place of untamable chaos and destruction. Ancient cultures believed the deep waters were inhabited by sea monsters, terrifying entities of disorder. But the Hebrew scriptures presented a radically different view. From the very first verses of the Bible, a line is drawn in the sand. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, we are told that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. That word for the deep in Hebrew is tehom. It represents the chaotic, unformed abyss. But the text does not say the chaos was in charge. It says the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. From page 1, Yahweh, the God of Israel, is established as the absolute master of the watery chaos. He does not battle the sea, he commands it. He orders it. He divides the waters to create dry land. This pattern echoes throughout the entire Old Testament. When the Israelites are trapped between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea, God uses the wind to split the chaotic waters, allowing his people to walk through on dry ground. The sea, the ultimate symbol of death, that is forced to become a pathway of salvation by the voice of its creator. But there is one specific passage in the Old Testament that the disciples would have known by heart, a song they likely sang in the synagogues. Psalm 107 paints a vivid picture of sailors caught in a deadly storm. The text describes how their courage melted away in their evil plight, how they reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. Then, the psalm says, they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. When Jesus stands up and tells the wind to sit down and be quiet, he is not just showing off a supernatural ability. He is stepping directly into the shoes of Yahweh. He is doing what the Hebrew scriptures explicitly state that only God himself can do. That is why the disciples were terrified. They realized that the one who hovered over the deep at the dawn of creation was currently taking a nap in the back of their fishing boat. This is the divine pattern behind the nature miracles. Jesus is constantly taking the most famous actions of God in the Old Testament and performing them in real time. If this journey through the hidden layers of Scripture is opening your eyes to the beauty of the biblical text, take a moment to subscribe and join our community. We explore the historical and theological patterns of the Bible every single week. The pattern of Jesus reenacting the actions of Yahweh does not stop at the edge of the water. It extends directly into the wilderness. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, Jesus and his disciples take a boat to a desolate place to get some rest. But the crowds see them leaving, and thousands of people run along the shore, beating the boat to the destination. When Jesus steps onto the land, he is met by a massive, hungry crowd. The text says he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. As evening approaches, the disciples get nervous. They are in the middle of nowhere. There are no towns nearby to buy food for 5,000 men, plus women and children. They tell Jesus to send the crowds away, but Jesus looks at them and says, "You give them something to eat." They manage to scrape together 5 small loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. Jesus takes the bread, looks up to heaven, says a blessing, and breaks the loaves. He gives them to the disciples to distribute, and the bread simply does not run out. It keeps multiplying in his hands until thousands of people have eaten their fill. Many Christians understand this beautifully as a miracle of provision, a reminder that God cares for our physical needs. But to the Jewish people sitting on that grass, a very specific historical memory was being triggered. Centuries earlier, and the nation of Israel was wandering in another desolate wilderness. They were starving, complaining to Moses that they were going to die. And what did God do? He rained down bread from heaven. The manna in the wilderness was the ultimate sign of Yahweh's provision for his people. Now, here is Jesus, standing in the wilderness, providing bread for a multitude, but there is a crucial difference. Moses had to pray and ask God to send the bread. Jesus does not ask for the bread to be sent. He is the one creating it. He is taking the place of Yahweh in the wilderness story. And the details matter. After everyone has eaten, the disciples gather up the broken pieces that are left over. They fill exactly 12 baskets. In biblical symbolism, talent is never just a number. It represents the 12 tribes of Israel. The message is entirely clear. The God who provided for the 12 tribes in the desert of Sinai has returned to gather and provide for his people once again. He is the new Moses, but he is also the God of Moses. The crowds recognize the parallel immediately. The Gospel of John tells us that after seeing this miracle, the people realize he is the prophet who is to come into the world. And they attempt to take him by force to make him their earthly king. They want a political leader to overthrow the Romans, someone who can keep their bellies full. But Jesus refuses to be the kind of king they want. He forces his disciples into a boat and sends them away across the sea, while he dismisses the crowd and goes up on a mountain to pray alone. This sets the stage for the most dramatic nature miracle of all, and the resolution of the mystery we mentioned at the beginning. It is now late at night. The disciples are out on the Sea of Galilee, and once again, and the wind is against them. They are straining at the oars, exhausted, making no progress. From his vantage point on the mountain, Jesus sees them struggling. Sometime between 3 and 6 in the morning, Jesus comes to them, but he does not hire another boat. He simply walks out onto the raging, chaotic surface of the sea. The Gospel of Mark gives us a vivid, almost terrifying picture. The disciples see a figure walking on the water in the darkness, and they think it is a ghost. They cry out in absolute terror. But then Mark includes a sentence that has baffled readers for centuries. He writes, "He meant to pass by them." Think about that. His friends are terrified, exhausted, struggling against a storm. Jesus performs a spectacular miracle, walking on the water, but his intention, apparently, it is to just casually stroll past their boat. Why? Was he ignoring them? Was he testing them? To understand this, we have to look back to the Old Testament, specifically to the book of Job. In Job chapter 9, Job is describing the overwhelming, terrifying majesty of God. He lists the things that only the Creator can do. Job says that God commands the sun, he seals up the stars, he stretches out the heavens. And then, Job says this, he alone tramples down the waves of the sea. But the text of Job does not stop there. A few verses later, Job says, "Behold, he passes by me, and I see him not. He moves on, but I do not perceive him." In the Greek translation of the Old Testament and the Septuagint, the exact same phrasing is used for God passing by Moses on Mount Sinai to reveal his glory. Passing by is a technical, theological term for a divine revelation. God passes by to show humans who he is. When Mark writes that Jesus intended to pass them by, he is not saying Jesus was ignoring them. He is waving a massive theological flag. He is telling the reader, look, the God of Job is here. The one who alone tramples the waves of the sea is walking past the boat, revealing his divine glory. Jesus is not just surviving the chaos. He is putting it under his feet. He is trampling the abyss. When the disciples cry out in fear, Jesus turns to them. He speaks over the roar of the wind. And what he says is the ultimate culmination of all these miracles. He says, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." In English, it sounds like a simple reassurance. Hey guys, it's just me, Jesus. But in the original Greek, the phrase he uses is ego eimi, I am. This is the exact phrase used in the Greek translation of Exodus. When God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, Moses asks for God's name, and God says, I am. World Health Organization, I am. Jesus is standing on the chaotic waters of the abyss, trampling the waves under his feet, and declaring the divine name of Yahweh over the storm. Ego, eimi, I am. He climbs into the boat with them, and the wind immediately ceases. The text tells us the disciples were utterly astounded. The pieces were finally coming together. The calming of the storm, the feeding in the wilderness, the walking on the sea. These were not random acts of kindness or magic tricks to gather a crowd. They were a carefully orchestrated, undeniable demonstration that the Creator of the universe had stepped into human history. When we look at the nature miracles of Jesus, there are three vital takeaways that change how we read the Bible and how we live our lives. First, we must read the miracles as theological claims. The Gospel writers were not just keeping a diary of strange events. They were deeply steeped in the Hebrew Scriptures. Every miracle Jesus performed was designed to trigger an Old Testament memory, to show that he was the fulfillment of the ancient patterns. When we read the New Testament without the Old Testament, we are watching a movie with the sound turned off. The actions are impressive, but we miss the profound dialogue happening beneath the surface. Second, The same God who ordered the cosmos orders your life. The ancient sea represented chaos, the unpredictable, destructive forces that human beings cannot control. We all have chaotic waters in our lives. Medical diagnoses, financial collapse, broken relationships, situations where the wind is howling and we feel like we are going to drown. Nature miracles remind us that chaos does not have the final word. The one who trampled the waves of the Sea of Galilee has absolute authority over the storms that threaten to sink you. He brings order out of the abyss. And finally, the most emotional truth of all, the creator of the storm is in the boat with you. Jesus did not just calm the storm from a safe distance on the shore. He was in the boat, experiencing the tossing of the waves alongside his friends. When he walked on the water, he did not stay out on the waves showing off his power. He climbed into the boat with terrified, exhausted people. When you are straining at the oars, when the wind is against you and the night is dark, you are not abandoned to the chaos. The great I Am is stepping into the boat with you. And where he is, the wind must cease, and the waters must be still. Which of Jesus' nature miracles gives you the most comfort when you are facing a difficult season? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear how these ancient truths are impacting your life today. Until next time, remember that no matter how loud the storm gets, the master of the deep is always in control. Peace. Be still.